Good evening. My name's Dave Good. I'm the Constituent Services Administrator with Chesterfield County. Just wanted to welcome everybody to tonight's meeting. It is the fourth of 5 budget town halls that we're doing this year. In a moment, I'll introduce our host for the evening, but first I wanted to go over a little bit of housekeeping related to the format of tonight's meeting. Like the others, we are doing these meetings in person and also virtually. So we have an in-person audience here in the public meeting room. We also have an audience tuning in via Facebook Live. Following some opening remarks by our host, we're going to hear a presentation from another member of our panel tonight, Mr. Durkin, and then following that, we'll open the floor to questions. Anyone who's here in person who would like to come up and issue a comment or a question, we would encourage you to come up to the microphones where I'm standing now. It just makes it so that everybody here can see and also hear you clearly, but also for our audience at home, makes the sound a lot better for them so they can hear you clearly as well. For those who are watching via Facebook Live, you can simply go to the comments form or the comments feed and enter your comment or question. We do have staff here tonight that are monitoring the questions, and we will be feeding those up to our panel during the Q&A for answers. The meeting is also being broadcast live through the county's YouTube channel and also through Chesterfield County Television, Comcast Channel 98, and Verizon 28. Just one more note, we have some sign-in sheets in the back of the room for anybody who is here in person. It's completely optional, but if you leave us your name and your contact information, and particularly an email address, we're able to sign you up to receive some additional information related to meetings like this and many other things related to Chesterfield. Without that, I'm going to introduce you to our host now. It is my honor to turn the mic over to the Honorable Leslie Haley. She is, of course, our Supervisor for the Midlothian Magisterial District. Ms. Haley.
Well, thank you, and welcome everybody. I'm really pleased to be here to host our 4th of 5 budget town meetings that are occurring, the last one tomorrow evening, and talking about our proposed 2023 budget. And so, as Mr. Good just explained to you, there are lots of opportunities for folks to engage, and I want to remind folks that budgeting is a process that we now look at through the lens of 12 months a year. So we don't wait until, you know, the beginning of January or even February to start this process. We are consistently and continuing looking at budget. You're going to find a brief presentation by Mr. Durkin tonight talking about all of the aspects that go into our budget, and as well I have Dr. Joe Casey with us tonight for comments or questions as we come down to that part of the program. I will let you know also and remind you we do have a public hearing on Wednesday night during our regular Board of Supervisors meeting at that point in time, and then our budget is scheduled to be adopted at our next meeting on April the 6th, correct? So, you know, I think that it's really important that everybody recognizes all the pieces that come together as we look at forming a budget. There are really many criteria, and one of which I know has influenced so many of our citizens and residents this year is the impact that that our residential real estate valuations have taken. And so we are very mindful of that. And on top of that, the more recent information regarding personal property tax that includes reevaluation of our vehicles. So you're going to hear some information in particular tonight as to how we are balancing those additional revenues in light of what we see are other measures needed across the county, looking at how we potentially can lessen some of this tax burden on specific citizens and still maintain services throughout the county as well. You're also going to see tonight, and we're going to hear about the historic investment we've made in schools, what we're doing to retain and recruit the best employees on both sides. You will see what we have done over these last 2 years has made a significant decision to invest in our people on both sides of the equation, and make sure that we are that our compensation models are not only fair but sustainable in the long run. And you're also going to hear a little bit about what we're proposing in the $540 million bond referendum that is planned for this fall. And so I will turn the mic over to Mr. Durkin, but before I do that, I also want to welcome Ms. Catherine Haynes, our Midlothian School Board representative, who has joined us tonight as well. And I thank you for coming out and joining with us, Ms. Haynes. So with that, I will turn it over to Mr. Durkin, and at the end, again, we will entertain questions.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. This budget really coalesces around the four areas that are in front of you. Our historic investment in the school system, as Ms. Haley referenced, our employee recruitment and retention, our bond referendum, and the broad tax relief. And over the course of the next few slides, I'll go through each of those major points. So the first part, and probably the most wide-ranging part of this budget, is the broad tax relief, and it's really the core of the fiscal 2023 budget. I'll go over these in the next few slides, but the core message is that the actions of the board since December, and with this proposed budget that's before the board, translates into a total tax relief package of over $52 million, which is about, on average, about $300 per household savings. The personal property tax relief brackets for the elderly and disabled, we adjusted all of those by 6% to match the Social Security cost of living adjustment. And we did it across all the brackets, the first time that that had been done in over a decade. Our business license, we had raised the exemption threshold in that from $300,000 per business to $400,000, which now means that 2/3 of all businesses located within Chesterfield County don't pay this tax, and there's an extra average of $2,000 per saving, with the extra $100,000 in tax relief for those above that $400,000 threshold. Then vehicle registration fee, we had increased that in 2015. The budget that's before the board actually reduces this back to $20, and it transfers all of it over to our capital improvement fund to fund community improvements, including roads and sidewalk projects. And so the chart you see before, there's a kind of short history of our real estate tax rate. You can see back in 1997, it was $1.09 per $100 of assessed value. The budget that's proposed today is bringing that down to 92 cents. The home value increases that we've seen are not a phenomenon that are unique to the county. It's happening nationwide. Recognising the impact of those increased assessments, the board earlier this year set the maximum tax rate at 93 cents. The proposed budget before you was able to take off an additional penny for that, which is the lowest you can see on the chart in the county's history. The other thing that we take great pride in is our 5-year plan, and we make sure that any of these actions that we take are sustainable over the course of that 5-year period and beyond. And you can see that the rate reduction that's proposed in this budget is actually in line with what we did in 2007 and 2008. That kind of stepped down from 97 cents to 95. But the core message of that also is that we see this as being sustainable. This is not like the large year-over-year increases that we saw in the 2007 to 9 era. The market today is more of a kind of problem with the nexus of supply and demand rather than a kind of underlying bubble in the financial system as a whole. So we're not expecting to see any large year-over-year increases. We're expecting it to kind of normalize, which is kind of what the major market forecasters predict happening nationwide as well over the next few years. So one of the things that we're able to do in this budget was kind of unique to a lot of, compared to a lot of our peers in the state, is actually adjust the personal property tax relief. The state, before I get into that, sorry, in December we actually increased that threshold from $1,000 to $1,500, which is the first adjustment that we had made to this program since 1998, which meant that an additional 14,300 vehicles didn't pay this tax. Recognising that personal property values, just like real estate, have been increasing with supply chain shortages over the last year, we explored ways of providing relief that would impact this upcoming June's bill cycle. When this program was initially initiated by the state, it was able to provide over 70% relief. As the years have went by, the state has not adjusted our allocated amount, which means the number of vehicles in the county have increased, the value of the relief that we've been able to offer has decreased, as you can see on the chart before you. We are forecasting a slight surplus for fiscal year 22, so we're able to take this unique approach and actually being able to increase that relief up from 46% to 55%, which in essence provides about $15 million of extra tax relief to citizens who are facing increased personal property assessments. So this chart before you is a kind of another way in years past that we presented the kind of dollar bill graphic. Where does each tax dollar go? By far the largest expenditure in our budget is the transfers to schools, which is projected to increase by $18 million in this budget. I'll go into the schools budget summary in a few more minutes. A quarter of our general fund goes to our public safety division, which is in line with years prior, police, fire and sheriff. And approximately 9% is going to our capital expenditures with our transfer to our capital improvement programme. And those three buckets alone actually account for over 3/4 of all the general fund expenditures for fiscal year 2023. So the fiscal year 23 budget is expected to increase by about $98 million or 12.1%. Recognising that the increase is larger than normal, I'm just going to take a few minutes to kind of break down what's driving that increase. The largest bucket you can see there is investing in the workforce. We implemented the public safety pay plan last year with the intention of doing a remaining pay study for our general government employees as well as our school employees, and having worked with the outside consultant, we never endeavour to be the pay leader, but we also have to be cognizant of the market conditions around us. And we are now facing competition from what would have not traditionally been our competitors in the market. Additionally, with our proactive approach last year to our public safety pay structure, the market has now moved again, especially in regards to starting salaries. So the budget before the board proposes an additional $12.5 million to ensure our public safety pay remains competitive in the region. Secondly, over the last few years, we've made some great strides in our capital improvement programme, especially in the area of major maintenance. As service demand grows and our facilities age, we are increasing our investment in major maintenance, as well as a variety of projects around the county. I'll go into the referendum in a few minutes, but this slide, this increase also does include one-time expenditures of about $13.4 million, including upgrades to our financial system and a shared warehouse facilities with our schools. Speaking of schools, this budget proposes an increase, as I said, of $18 million of our transfer to them, which will help achieve many of their goals. As part of our fiscal year 2021 year-end surplus, the county made a one-time infusion of $27 million into the school's supplemental retirement programme, which freed up a recurring about $12 million a year in operating capacity for the school system. So as a result of this infusion, the effective increase to our schools transfer is about $28.8 million. And then finally, we do have some strategic investments in this budget through our additional funding request that you can see on the bottom right, about $7.6 million. We will go through what some of those investments are, but did want to point out that this is lower than what we have traditionally funded in prior years, and a large part of that funding is actually around obligated contracts that we will have to pay. So the employee compensation for fiscal year 2022, we were able to institute a 2% merit for our employees. The pay study that we have is over the course of 2 years. We recognise that it's a large expense and we can't do it all in 1 year. So there are some employees who will go to a new $12 to $16 minimum pay per hour, or there'll be a flat 5% adjustment across the board. As I said, the public safety pay study will align with the new regional minimums with the continuation of our step increase that was part of the public safety pay plan. And then as kind of the final step of that, what we call 252 programme, there is a 2% merit programme for general government employees in fiscal year 23. And as I said, as we develop the fiscal 2024 budget, we will look at the pay study phase 2 for the remaining part of the pay plan. So this is the additional funding requests that I talked about a couple of minutes ago, and they really coalesce around these 5 areas. Our continued commitment to our public safety. We are expanding our police service aid programme by 3 positions per year. There are currently 19 positions. That over the next 5 years, that will cost about $275,000. And there's also minimum staffing increases for fire and EMS to ensure adequate coverage 24/7 around fire stations in the county. Strengthening our infrastructure and facilities. We are increasing our local contribution to the Greater Richmond Transit Corporation to fund our Fund Rate 82 Express route. And then we're also increasing our positions in building and grounds to help with the increased building capacity coming online, including our custodial, HVAC and full-time trade positions. Enhancing quality of life, parks and rec. over the last few years has been a major demand driver in the county. Last year, as part of our fiscal year 2022 budget, we proposed adding additional Parks and Rec athletic field crew. The next budget for 23 and 24 also includes an expansion of that program with an additional 3 positions per year. And then there's also what we started in fiscal year 22 with the conversion of part-time to full-time ratio in libraries. It was originally about 2/3 to 1/3 part-time to full-time. We are adding about 7 additional positions per year, which will reverse this ratio by the end of the 5-year plan. Then emphasis on customer service. We have a taxpayer portal with the Commissioner of Revenue and Treasurer to kind of really enhance our communication and reporting efforts with that office. And there's also some Treasurer staffing enhancements to provide customer service for people as they come in and out to pay their bills. Then investments in support services. Our employee medical centre over the last couple of years has seen heavy demand from both county and schools, and we are increasing their staffing levels with a customer service representative and a nurse practitioner as well. And as I said, about $2 million of that 7.6 is really tied up in contracts that are spread throughout agencies from IT to procurement and general services that we have to pay. So that eats up a lot of our capacity. Inflation has been affecting everyone, I'm sure, in here. It's affected me personally, but it also affects the organisation as a whole, and we have to be cognizant of that and make sure that we fulfil our contractual obligations so that we can still provide the excellent services that our citizens demand. That being said, for the first time in our document this year, we are publishing our unfunded list. Every year we get a lot of requests. Our staff go through that and make recommendations as to what can be funded and what can't be funded. That doesn't mean that what didn't make the funded list isn't a priority. It just means that within our competing pressures on that same tax dollar, we weren't able to fund everything. So as you can see there was about $11.1 million in unfunded operating requests, including 81 positions. That ran the whole gamut of the organisation, from Parks and Rec to Sheriff to IT. In our capital plan, additionally, we were not able to fund essentially just under $250 million in capital requests over the 5-year period, including armour vehicles for our police department, additional park sites, and additional fire stations. And then every year we have published an unfunded transportation project list. This year we're doing that again as well, and it's still cresting above $4 billion, even with additional funds coming through from the Central Virginia Transportation Authority. So there are many unknowns that we've faced as we developed the fiscal year 2023 budget. There have been a lot of labour market fluctuations over the last few years that are still continuing. There are a lot, as I said, of inflationary pressures, reaching, I think, is a 45-year high as of last week. And then, as everyone I'm sure is aware, the kind of geopolitical unrest that's happening in the East right now, that potentially could drive our inflation rate further. But the budget that is before the board has been developed with some flexibility in mind. We do have a sizable PAYGO, or essentially cash contribution, to our CIP, including for a new district enhancement programme, and then some seed money to kind of jumpstart on some referendum projects. We have that merit adjustment of 2%, as I said, in February of next year. And we have our own long-term liabilities for pensions and line of duty. We do make above our policy requirement contributions. We have that built into our budget. And then, as with some uncertainty at the state level and increasing personal property tax collections, we have made a conservative approach to those revenues so that we aren't caught short if something happens at the state level. Then the interest rate assumptions that we have on our investments. Over the last few years, we have made significant strides in making sure that we get the greatest return on our investments. With the declining rate environment right now, we have dialed those down to reflect current market conditions. And then, so this slide before you really shows, speaking about inflation, this is one of the metrics we'll look at, is essentially what's the true cost of running the government. As inflation has been a hot topic of late, and it is driving partly part of our general fund increase. But if you strip out the effects of inflation, you can actually see that our per capita costs are lower than what our post-recession 2008-9 average was. And it's effectively, if you go further back in our charts, it's the lowest operating level since 1992. And it really is a testament to the board's commitment to maximising the taxpayer dollars while continuing to maintain the high level of service that our citizens expect. And then we went through a similar exercise for the schools. This is our local contribution to the school system. You can see it follows a similar trend to the county level, and like us, is not back to that post-2008-9 recession average. And so, you know, at this time of year, we have that, you know, one largest line item expenditure in our budget are transfer to schools. But really, the support that we provide to schools happens in multifaceted ways. As I said, the $18 million transfer this year is on par with what we did last year. With that additional infusion to the supplemental retirement, the increase is effectively $28 million. You can see there some of the other things that we've done over the last few years for the school system. When we had to reduce our budget when COVID hit, there was only a $10 million increase. There was actually a $10 million increase, I apologise, to transfer to the school system, despite us cutting our overall county budget by $51 million. Last year, we increased the transfer by $18 million. Then the capital side, we've been able to take advantage of a favourable interest rate environment to go back out to the market and borrow some money that we could put into schools. You can see there the $58 million for the major maintenance in fall 2020, the largest infusion that we'd made into major maintenance in the school system's history. And we closed on the second bullet there you see on the chart, the VPSA bonds that enabled us to accelerate 2 middle schools in the county. And then, as I said, we have 2 joint projects in our capital improvement program, our ERP, essentially our financial system, and a joint shared warehouse facility with schools. The county is paying for all of those with no ask to the school system. And then with the site purchases that we have made at Spring Rock Green and Upper Magnolia, potential future sites for schools, the county has been able to fund that with no ask of school funds as well. And then with the infusion of federal dollars that we've had in the last few years, we have diverted a lot of those resources to the school system. $28 million of CARES, $25 million of ARPA, then from the year end 27 of the SRP, those 3 alone accounting for about $80 million.
Mr. Durkin, can I interrupt back at that slide just so that folks can better understand? So with us funding this $27 million into SRP, what we've effectively done is taken that burden off of schools to have to pay $10 million a year to try and fund that SRP program, correct? So what that's doing, when we, just to clarify further, what that means is that, in fact, gives them $28 million in additional spending volume, correct? Because we've now taken that burden off of them. And SRP is a program that basically phases itself out. But, you know, it was only 5 years ago or so, 4 years ago, we found it to be in the hole to the effect of $100 million. So we've basically now made that program whole, correct? And will then not only free up $10 million this year, but on an ongoing basis, correct?
Yes, that is 100% correct.
Thank you.
So after the pause during the uncertain times of the last 2 years, we are actually now full steam ahead in planning our next referendum. Actually, the pause has helped us in many ways, as we've been able to really define more neatly this concept, costs, and locations of the projects than the last 2 years. And also, it's enabled us to further refine the prioritization from feedback from employees, elected officials, and citizens and businesses located within the county, to ensure that, you know, there's a project has something for everyone, everywhere around Chesterfield County. Also, our continued strong fiscal modelling has made sure that we haven't had to increase our rate in order to be able to accommodate this. We are able to accommodate this referendum within the 5-year plan with the tax rate that is being proposed. We are proposing to have the ballot at the end of the year, but some of the highlights that kind of go around 4 major areas for the upcoming referendum: fire stations, police precincts that when we actually build these will actually get us out of operating leases to the tune of about $250,000 a year that we can then reinvest into operations, parks and libraries, and then our school system. And the split between the county and schools is about $375 million for the school system and $165 million for the county projects. And just to point out that this actual referendum for us is going to be the first major general government referendum that we've had since 2004. We did have an upgrade to our emergency communication systems with the 2013 referendum, but as I say, this is the first one that really touches all the general government buildings since 2004. And so that's the kind of timeline that we have over the next 5 years for all of those projects. You can see there we're starting in fiscal 23 with some investments in River City to Chester Fire Station through to fiscal year 25, where we're proposing elementary and high schools, to fiscal 27 with more fire and police stations. We are petitioning to add this to the ballot in August with a public engagement program from June through October. And then finally, just to touch on our utility rates for a second, you can see there that the proposed rate for Chesterfield residents for water and wastewater for the average user will be about $60.71 for a monthly residential charge. The other three localities to the right, those are actually their fiscal year 2022 budgets numbers. So we're actually still lower with a year further ahead than our competing localities, and I believe all of them, if I'm not mistaken, have proposed increases to the rates. So still in the region that we are the lowest for our utility rates, which is really a testament to the rate modelling that our utility department does each and every year to kind of smooth out those rate increases so they're not kind of one-off large increases as years pass. And so we have one more community meeting tomorrow night with the public hearings on March 23rd, this Wednesday, with budget adoption on April 6th. Please submit any feedback and input in the meantime. You can always email our blueprint@chesterfield.gov website, and either myself or a team member will get back to you. So with that.
Well, thank you. I would like to speak to one thing that I think is of concern in the community at large, and this has to do with what we are looking at in what would be considered, or what seems to have been considered, a gap that exists in funding to schools. And there's been considerable email communication and I think considerable misinformation in the community about what this gap looks like and what this gap means. And so let's go back to the fact that we're talking about investment in our employees on both sides of the equation. And so, yes, last year we were very, very fortunate to come together on both sides and invest in our public safety folks and invest in our teachers. And when I say teachers, I mean the gamut of folks that are actually in the classroom providing firsthand educational experiences to our children. And so then we made the commitment that we would look at those that were not considered either in that public safety realm or considered in that in-person teaching environment. And we looked at the rest of our employees and have just completed on both sides of the equation a compensation study. And one of the things that we've talked about and have talked about for several years, back to the days when I believe I was in my first or second year on the board, one of the large commitments we made was to bring schools and county together when it came to health plans and when it came to benefit structures, so that there was consistency, we had better buying power, we had better ability to address these issues. And we've sort of hit a roadblock, I can tell you, that's been a little frustrating to me, including the commitments that we've had from schools regarding 12-month employees and the commitment to bring 12-month employees to the table to be on the same leave structure. And I will say that that disappointment continues, and it's costing us somewhere between $3 and $4 million a year. And you will hear me say it again, and it will not go unnoticed by me, at least in my role. And I can tell you other members of my board are very concerned about that gap that exists. But on top of that, today, and as I told you this earlier, this budgeting process is a continual process. And so one of the things that we got information about today regarding this compensation study, that is the ongoing compensation study and most recent compensation study, is that this gap that exists as we are looking at consistency. So when I say consistency, We want janitors on both sides of the game, whether it be on the county side or the school side, to be paid equitably. We want our secretaries that are doing equitable jobs to be paid equitably, and we want our administration to be paid on an equitable basis. And you saw in Mr. Durkin's presentation that we're looking at taking many of our employees from $12 to $16 an hour and looking at a pay increase at a flat rate of 5%. And I will tell you and challenge my school colleagues in this audience today to do the same thing, because that's where the $8.5 million gap exists, folks. And I will tell you personally my concern. I don't want to be in 2008 and 2009 and have to go to anybody on either side and ask for a pay cut. When you build a budget that is not built on one-time expenditures, we all know this in our homes, and you build it on a pay structure that includes a 2% merit every year, which is the minimum that we expect, we have got to ensure on a long-term basis we can sustain those monies. And so when we look at building in an additional multi-million, $33 million in compensation, that $33 million next year is not $33 more million. We all know that. That's $33 million plus 2% on top of that at a minimum. And so I am concerned that $8.5 million gap does not exist if schools comes to the table on the same platform we are, paying their folks on a flat 5% and paying their folks on a $12 to $16 incremental basis and taking out their whatever threshold hybrid zone implementation model that is. This is not monies that are designated for teachers or classrooms. These are other folks that are in this second study. So that is information we just got today. It is probably the first time many of you are hearing this. We are, again, committed to the sustainability of the pay plans we are putting in place. And we all know this bubble that we are in right now is a little tenuous. The inflationary indexes we're seeing are very concerning. And so the conservative nature of this board moving forward is to make sure that we can continue to keep our people, our employees at every single level in every single position, from the classroom to the janitors to the bus drivers that we have supported to our public safety folks, absolutely compensated at every level they're entitled to, and be competitive in the region, and we are competitive in the region. So with that, I've made my statements to clarify some things that have been floating around out there, and I'm happy, we are all happy to hear questions from folks in attendance or address some of these questions that have been proposed here to us as well.
Good evening. My name is Ben Pearson Nelson. I'm president of the Chesterfield County Council of Parent-Teacher Associations, and I'm here representing that association tonight. One of the concerns that we have is that the realities on the ground in our schools are not being represented by our elected officials. So what we're not hearing is about the teacher shortage. So we're 200 teachers down right now. We have 200 vacancies. We'll need 700 teachers this summer. We have to hire 700 new teachers this summer. Our kids remain in last place for per capita spending relative to similar schools in Virginia. And if you look at on a national scale, our kids have fallen behind kids in Alabama for funding. We're just ahead of Mississippi, the poorest state in the United States. Our council voted to support the superintendent's budget, not because it was the budget we wanted, but it's because it's a minimalist budget. It's the least we can do for our schools. And that's where we're at. Once again, if this budget passes, the superintendent's budget passes for our schools, our kids will still be in last place next year. So our question is, how do we get our kids out of last place? When do we acknowledge the struggles of our kids, and how do we get out of last place? How do we get the resources we need to make sure our kids aren't going to schools in trailers, our schools aren't overcrowded, we have highly qualified teachers in every room, we address the greater needs from COVID, so now we have reading and math issues that are greater than ever, and we don't have the teachers to provide that education. A lot of our members couldn't come to the meeting tonight. They have jobs and children to take care of. So on your behalf, we collected comments and we collected petition signatures to ask you to fully fund schools. And you'll recall the last time we did this, we collected 8,000 signatures. This year, we have about 1,000 signatures already, and most of them from Midlothian. We have over 500 signatures from Midlothian residents asking for full funding of schools. That's what constituents want. And there is no counter petition. As far as I know, there's not another 8,000 people demanding that we keep our kids in last place. And if there is, I would love to talk to those folks. The reality is on the ground that our schools are in trouble. We need much greater help than we see in this budget. So please advocate for us. Please advocate for our kids. Please advocate for our teachers. Thank you.
I'll take a question here regarding a question that was posed online. What changes are proposed for the personal property tax rate due to the assessment increases? And so what we've done is we have, so currently the exemption rate, the exemption threshold is 46%. So 46% of the value of your personal property tax is exempt. And we are raising that threshold to 55%. So we are giving folks a break because we see what the evaluations of, have happened to personal property. And we are also very mindful that those probably are not sustainable. It's kind of a weird year when you've got a used vehicle that's worth more than sometimes what you paid for it, or worth more than what you possibly even could sell it for, depending. So again, our valuations are based on a low market book value. They are not done by the county. That actually comes out of the Commissioner of Revenue's office. But we do have the ability to give some relief on that, and we will raise that threshold to 55%. Sir.
Good evening. My name is Todd Starkweather. I teach at Midlothian High School, and I reside in either Matoaka or Clover Hill, wherever the new redistricting lines fell. I don't know, you can figure that out. I'm speaking today to encourage the Board of Supervisors to fully fund the needs-based school budget, which was presented by Superintendent Dr. Doherty and passed unanimously by the school board. The budget works toward the goal that everyone in this room has or should have: strengthening our community and county. Providing the school system with less than it needs erodes the effectiveness of our schools, harms the children attending public schools in the county, and in the end, creates a less desirable place to live. Enrollment in CCPS has increased even during the era of COVID because families see and recognize the excellent work that the schools have done and can continue to do if fully funded. At the beginning of the school year, Dr. Doherty emailed teachers a video message promising to fully fund phase 2 of the pay study. In this budget, he and the school board have kept their promise. Failure to follow through on this would only further demoralize the workers in the school system. It would communicate to them that the county doesn't value the work that they have done to help make Chesterfield attractive to the many families that have moved here and will move here. Anything short of fully funding the pay studies in the budget will be interpreted as code to school division workers to dust off their resumes and look for better paying jobs elsewhere, which so many have unfortunately already done. And to piggyback off of the 200 plus teacher vacancies in February 2022, that number in February 2020 was 37. We all agree that the physical classroom is the best place for students and teachers. But without investing in schools, including worker compensation, student needs, and the physical buildings themselves, schools simply become holding pens for 8 hours a day. Students only receive the benefit of the physical classroom when the school's needs are funded. Students do better when their rooms have the necessary supplies. Students do better when their buildings have up-to-date equipment. Students do better when their buildings are actual buildings and not trailers. Students do better with smaller student-to-teacher ratios. Students do better when experienced workers, committed to the school division and its mission, are in the classroom. Students do better with full-time teachers rather than revolving substitutes. I know of one classroom at Midlothian High where a class will essentially have a different teacher for each of the 4 marking periods this year. If the county wants the students in the county to do better, the county will fully fund the needs-based school budget. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Question about the bar graph you show with funding per student over the years. The per student funding is going up from last year, but is still lower than the first year shown on the graph. Why would funding be lower than 10 plus years ago? So again, this graph is a graph that's adjusted for inflation, so the nominal amount is higher, but the buying power of those dollars is still slightly lower than that point in time. Anything that you want to add to that, Mr. Durkin, I know you put those numbers together for us.
Sure. So yeah, that is essentially what you see on that chart is that, inflation tends to vary by varying amounts every year. If you strip out the effects of that, you can see what the real cost is. You can see from back in the presentation, both the county and schools have followed a kind of similar trend. So on a nominal level, the amount going to schools is higher, but once you adjust it for inflation, it's slightly lower, but it is lower on both sides of the equation, both for the counties and the school system.
Mr. Durkin, I would add too is the state portion is also a per capita trend as a layer on top of that.
Correct, and I might also add that the comment that was made earlier regarding the funding per student being the lowest in the state, and I know Mr. Durkin has worked with us on this as well, that these numbers is like comparing apples to oranges to onions, correct? And so I'm a little bit troubled that that is the messaging we're sending to our community, because that is a false message. I can tell you that I will put us up against any of the districts throughout this entire state with the amount of money that we have provided in 7 new schools, with 2 on the horizon, with the funding that also is coming in dollar funding this year as anticipated, and what we have done over the last years. And while we look at what that amounts to on a per cap or per student basis, everybody looks at that number differently, whether they're adding capital into that, whether they're adding state funding into that, whether they're adding different markers into that. But to say that we are the lowest in the state is simply not true.
I would add, just for transparency, what I think we'll try and do, maybe this fall will be the first time, is we'll start the budget process with an agreed upon formula. The best entity to compare ourselves is to ourselves. I've worked in multiple localities. The numerators and denominators are all different of how it's sized up. I encourage anyone to look at our website of the shared and collaborative services. There are a lot of things that are done in kind, because again, again, 2 entities doing similar things should share their resources. In fairness to the schools, we utilize their postal services for interoffice mail delivery, since they traverse the county in many ways that we do. So it's not just one-sided in that regard. The second thing is that I think we have to quantify better some of the mid-year adjustments that are made. Most notably, again, we try and benefit the schools by the surpluses that are generated to reinvest for mid-school year dollars. So there's budget, student per capita, and then there's also actual trends that ensue. And so I think maybe at year end we have to size those up as well, because I would imagine they are always higher than the beginning budget because of the reinvestment of surpluses. But I'm willing to start that exercise and have a nice transparent formula that's disclosed well on websites for all to see. As far as the comparison to others, there's other factors. Just from my time and tenure is, we have one of the largest enrollments, and we also have large schools. So those economies of scale should traverse again into being budgets that are best leveraged per dollar per capita. Same thing on the county side of the shop, and that's why I think you see the per capita trends of the counties and schools in essence trending the same when you remove inflationary adjustments. But we'll try and get that information. As far as how the state competes with other states, I think you have to bring the state of Virginia into that conversation just as much, because they are the other side. They're the 50% side of the equation. In many states, they're greater than 50% share. So I think that's fair to include them in that discussion.
Question, how can the county grow revenue to support staff and provide quality services community members need and deserve so as to not rely on one-time funds. I'm not really sure what we're looking for here. I can tell you that we are definitely in consideration of the changing demographics of our population. So we are now at a place where, interestingly, we have fallen around, is it 35% of our families that have kids in schools? Close to 30? Close to 30% of our families have kids in our school system. So you think about that shift and what that means also to the shift of the population that's over 55. And so looking at the shift in needs, the shift in services to provide to those, and the shift that, quite frankly, that this pandemic has brought to just the way in which our citizens look at what has value to them in being outside, and looking at the expansion of our parks and recreation programs, our library programs, many other services that exist that reach across every demographic of our population. And so I'm not sure what the reference is to one-time funds, other than those being funds we received during the pandemic.
What I would say by that, just really hone in that one-time funds, is that, you know, the federal relief dollars that we've received, we didn't rely on them to supplement our operations, and we strategically invested those around the county to kind of boost what we had already planned. But as you'll see through our budgets, that's not a source of funding that we rely on as we've built this budget, and especially over the 5-year plan. That I said earlier, we almost stress test all of our expenditures through that 5-year cycle and make a premium on the fact that we don't, in comparison to other localities, rely on one-time funds to fund our ongoing operations. They've really been used, you know, investments in the school system and investments in the park system, and really those kind of one-time things to kind of boost things that we already had in our plan, but not to supplement ongoing expenses.
Any other questions or statements?
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Fred DeMay. I'm from the Matoka District. I'd like to thank Ms. Haynes over here for helping clear up a few issues that I had and have been ongoing. I've been at a couple of these meetings, and I just want to touch on a couple of other issues. You're planning land acquisitions, Southside Speedway. What is your rationale for that? What's driving you to purchase that?
I mean, anyone in particular or in general?
In general. In general.
Well, I think we have a couple of rationales. Number one, we can control what the ultimate use of the land is then, meaning that, for instance, whether it be the property that we purchased in Upper Magnolia was zoned residential, with the anticipation of 5,000 additional residential homes out there. We looked at that and saw an opportunity that we could actually then secure property for several things. The expansion of the Powhite Parkway extension, which acquiring all of that right away is not only timely but costly. The ability to have a site ready for schools, potentially fire safety if needed, and also an economic development opportunity. You know, the property at Southside Speedway, again, an opportunity to secure property that would be adjacent to already owned county property with River City, and then looking at what the opportunities exist within the community to use that property either for expansions of that as well as some commercial use, but again, taking that in regard to a way that we then had better control than the current uses. And Spring Rock Green, another, you know, the ability to, from a county perspective, to invest and mirror what we're asking of our businesses and citizens, which is, you know, reinvesting in our aging neighborhoods, our aging folks. And so what's happened with across the street with Stonebridge has been nothing but a success story in returning those monies to our citizens as well as the tax gains that continue to come from those properties.
Okay, yeah, because real estate in a really hard downturn can be a bit of a liability. The other issue here that I did want to talk to you about is the reduction of the car tax, the threshold going from, or the relief going from 46% to 55%. Is this all being decided by the Commissioner of the Revenue? Or are you involved with this?
So the Commissioner of Revenue actually sets the valuation, and she has used a very standardized procedure to do that, which this year, like every other locality, there is, Then when that came to our attention on the board, we talked about how to address, for that sort of windfall of additional monies that is having significant impact on our citizens. And we, through, honestly, our budget team strategizing, came to the realization that the best way to do this, recognizing this is probably not a consistent reeval, these are a one-time kind of boost, was to make the adjustment in the way in which we apply the rate. So that the rate application comes from us. The commissioner does the valuations.
Okay, because I've got some information that the state, they passed a law that allows this to happen. Could you elaborate on that a little bit? That there was some requirement that they needed to pass or the governor will sign. The other issue that I have with this is this applies to all vehicles? It talks about the cars, automobiles, but it applies to all vehicles, does it?
My understanding, Mr. DeMay, this is the assessment ratio, the car tax relief that started in the late 1990s under Governor Gilmore. As you recall, the state maximized, it was initially trying to get to 100% and then stay at 100% thereafter. Yep. It stalled at 70%, but it didn't just stall at the percentage, it stalled at $950 million a year. And again, as you would imagine, as Virginia's grown, vehicle values have grown over time, that $950 million converted to today for Chesterfield County is about a 46% car tax relief from the state, and the allocation of that relief instead of the 70% from many years ago. The actual calculation, if we had continued same old, that 46% would have gone down to about 40% for the 2022 calculation. Where that percentage is set as part of the budget adoption process and various resolutions, because we have to pick that ratio. And again, for the last 25 years, it's really just been a formulaic method of taking that relief that's been fixed at a certain amount for Chesterfield County since 1997 and applying it amongst the entire tax base. So as far as vehicles, if you had a vehicle that gets that car tax relief percent in the past, you would be getting this 55%. There are some entities, commercial vehicles, business vehicles, that don't apply to the car tax relief. The car tax relief was designed for a citizen or a residential vehicle.
And it tops out at $20,000 of assessed value?
That's correct. And then, as Mr. Gerard mentioned, the minimum threshold was set at $1,000 back in the late 1990s. And again, we thought it's important to also look at both ends of the spectrum, because again, $1,000 inflated is actually at or above $1,500 today.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Just last comment here, Mrs. Haley. I've been around for quite a while. This is a very aggressive tax rate reduction that the county's proposing, and it's impressive on its surface, but it's impressive as it goes deeper because it's a proactive approach. Dr. Casey is not letting this fall out on the floor and then trying to pick up the pieces. They're trying to do this ahead of time and mitigate what's going to be still a large tax increase, and a situation that's even made more dynamic because of the lack of clarity on salaries, the lack of clarity on where inflation's going. So I would strongly recommend that you pass the county's budget as it's written now, with the 1 cent tax reduction that's been proposed in addition to the already reduced tax rate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeMay. It's good to see you.
Yes, you too.
Thank you. We received a question about the CCPS IDEA pandemic funding, and we're going to have to, staff's going to have to look into this with school staff and get back to the requester on that, because we're not familiar with what CCPS IDEA pandemic funding
Yeah, the only thing I'll add is any funding that has come from the federal government, COVID, in the last 2 years, we have appropriated that back with the federal requirements, and the school board's taken their appropriate action, suspended in compliance with federal intentions. And each year end, because of federal dollars, they go through an accountability exercise via our audit. So the FY22 audit would reflect that if its money's received and spent. If not, I think by the FY23 audit, you would see that disclosed.
And I can just say that I can tell you that staff on both sides from county and schools has spent an enormous amount of time working through all of these federal dollars to maximize their use so that no penny got unspent, and whatever couldn't be used at a timely basis on school side, we transferred over and then gave back through a different vehicle to make sure that everything was there for their extensive use. And I can tell you there's been a significant investment in our schools, in our buildings, in our programming, every dollar that we could use. And so kudos to the work that the staff has been doing for these last 2 years, because every dollar came with different tags and different timelines, and following all of that was an enormous effort. But again, strategizing the two teams together, they really did. And folks, there's been a significant influx into our schools of that money, and appropriately, especially with air quality and addressing all of those issues that have been suggested. So, yes,
Hi.
ma'am.
My name is Tessa Schumann, and I'm here representing the parent-teacher organizations of both Midlothian Middle School, and I'm the advocacy chair at Betty Weaver Elementary. Excuse me. And this is my first gig in dipping my toes into advocacy, and the thing that really brought me here was the pandemic, because of course it changed everything, and my children were home with me all the time, and I loved that for a little while. But teaching them is not my bag. That was a special challenge, and I love mothering. And I've got a master's degree, I'm a clever girl, but teaching my children is a specialty skill. And if I could write a love song to the teachers who spend their time and talent in my children, then I would. However, what I want to do is I want to keep them here. I am very appreciative of, number one, what a challenge it must be to try and negotiate all of these competing things. And I see in the way that Chesterfield is bouncing back economically, we are attracting jobs and folks are moving to Chesterfield to work here because our businesses are great. But the people who are not coming to Chesterfield for jobs are teachers. They're not coming. They're leaving, because the starting salary for a teacher in Henrico is better. They can live here and work somewhere else. But schools add value to our homes. Schools add value to our community, whether you have children in them or not. We do have a changing demographic. We do have folks who are older, but much of their inflation hedge, much of their nest egg is the value of their home, and we are reducing the tax rate but robbing them of its value. Their homes will be less valuable if our schools are less competitive. We are building beautiful new buildings, and I'm super excited about them, thank you. But who's going to work there? Who will come if we cannot properly pay and support our staff? If our teachers feel like they need to buy their own hand soap and decorate their own bathroom so that they can have a school that isn't old and sad, they deserve it. I have heard those teachers' voices in my home for a year. They are part of our community, and they deserve it. And I also want to say that I really feel like we are losing one of the most precious resources that adds value not just to our community, but to our future. Because when we are not educating our kids to be competent members of our workforce, they leave. I grew up in Chesterfield County schools. I'm back because it's a great place to raise children. It's a great place to work. But if we can't get our kids the same education, if our teachers don't stay, then no one else will. The value of our homes is tied so closely to our schools. Even if we don't have children in those schools, they bring value to everyone. What I'm hearing tonight is, number one, I do hear a number of very specific proposals about investments, and I'm thankful for that. But I am also hearing a disagreement between the elected officials and the school advocates. But why? Why, when we say we need to fully fund our schools, why? When the superintendent says this is what we need to run functionally, why is there not a yes? Yes, you can have that. Great, what do you need? When I hear that disagreement, that why isn't there a partnership there? That's what I want. I want my elected officials to support the schools in our community, to invest in the future and not just the right now. We're taking away a penny of the tax rate on my home, but we're robbing it of its value. So that's my request, is please be a partner to us. Please don't be an adversary, be an advocate for us. That's why we need you here. I'm so thankful for all of the work that you do, but please advocate for us, for our children, for our future, for our homes, for our whole community. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have to say, I really, really appreciate the comments, and I really appreciate all of the sentiment, and I want you to understand that, you know, that as an elected, we sit here and we look through that lens of saying, absolutely, I completely agree with everything you're saying, but unfortunately, we see so much broader than the information that you have access to. And so, for instance, I can tell you that we will match our teacher pay scale to any pay scale in the region. And it doesn't have to do with strictly what that starting salary is, because we're going to chase that all day long, and it's going to be we chase it and Henrico chases it, and we chase it and Henrico chases it. But what we did in this pay study is that we made sure that that teacher that stays committed to Chesterfield is going to have a better pay and a better retirement plan and across the board. And that is the project, and that's what you've got to look at to match, and we will match that. So that conversation comes to play. But the more important issue, too, and we look at this really significantly, and quite frankly, coming from my background in business as well, we look across the board and say, what does it take to build an environment, to build the entirety of not only recruiting, but retaining all through the process. And so we look at pay, we look at culture, we look at all of these issues. We're looking at it, and I know schools are looking at it as well. Everybody is in a position right now where they're fighting for teachers, just like we're fighting for public safety, right? Right now, we happen to be sitting in a position where our public safety sits in that same bucket, in that same category. And as of our last meeting, we were short 5 police officers. That's unheard of in the country. But there's been
but we're short 700 teachers.
And I can tell you right now, there's got to be an issue there and a question there that people need to be discussing. And we've come to the table to say, how are we discussing this? But building a pay scale, it's like anything else. You're building a pay scale. If that pay scale is not sustainable, then I can sit there all day and say, I'll pay a starting teacher $100,000 and get them here. And what have I done to that teacher when they hit year 4? I've done no favors to anybody, but when I can build a pay scale that says to that teacher, we're going to be attractive, we're going to be competitive, we're going to offer you competitive benefits, we're going to build and watch what we're doing with everything else as far as facilities and infrastructure and the team that's on the school side, and I can tell you that we're going to treat you fairly. You might not get paid the absolute best, but if you stay with us for longevity, you're going to get treated fairly. Now, the question may become, on the school side, what piece of that is missing if they're sitting at 700 vacancies, but I'm not so sure that across the country, others aren't suffering with that as well. But I can tell you that I'm not going to be the person that's going to look at that teacher next year and say I'm going to have to ask for 2% back. Just like I'll make the comment to Mr. to Mr. DeMay, who was saying, I think that this is a fair and equitable rate. Could we possibly maybe look at maybe taking another penny off, and then I got to go back next year to the citizens and say we got to ask for a penny back with the inflation that's going on? We're building a pocket. We're building a pocket as well of monies and savings that is sustainable. What do you think happened to those teachers when we built an SRP, or previous boards built an SRP that almost went into default 5 years ago with a $100 million gap in that retirement plan? So all those pieces cost money. So that $8.5 million that is the supposed gap that exists is $8.5 million in compensation that I can promise you I cannot begin to tell you today is in any way sustainable, nor is it in any way across the board consistent and commensurate with what we have established to be fair market value for positions on the county and school side. And it has nothing to do with what we've committed to teacher pay. That is not what the superintendent has proposed to do with that $8.5 million. So that's the question that needs to happen on the school side.
Respectfully, ma'am, what I'm asking for is advocacy on our behalf. I feel an animosity here, and I feel that there's not a partnership where there should be one, where they say we need this $8.5 million. Okay, well then let's find it. I don't understand why that's not happening.
I think if you go back to the fall when we started the process, the advocacy was there jointly with our joint legislative proposals to the state. And again, one of the things I don't think the average citizen knows is that the state doesn't fund all teachers. So when you read about this governor, regardless what party they are, regardless what the General Assembly is, this or that they're not recognizing 800 teachers that are 100% locally funded because we buy down the student-teacher ratio far below what the minimums of the state are. And nobody wants to be at a high classroom ratio to have 100% teachers funded. So again, anytime there's a raise proposed by the state, that raise is not for the entire teacher base. It's not even really the raises for what the teacher salaries that we're trying to do to make them for market or the related benefits. So we had that advocacy in the fall. We still have that advocacy. We're fighting downtown every day with the General Assembly, and they're still not, as you know, and that makes another variable in this process. So, you know, our debate right now is still with the state to best leverage a base increase going forward with them. And all I can promise you is when the day is done as we adopt this budget and the teacher scales are done, it's not just a starting salary that's going to be illustrated. It's every step through a 30-year career for a teacher, police officer, firefighter. And again, we are the only system that I'm aware of that does not have compression throughout the salary steps. So there are some localities we may compete with that may try and get a higher starting salary, but by year 5 or so and through year 30, because we don't have this, there's positions elsewhere where you get to a certain year and you may be at that same amount for multiple years in a row. That lends to a lot of morale issues and people leaving after a certain period of time. So we're working very hard together on that. You just may not see it as much because a lot of it's behind the curtain. A lot of it's the mystery of what others are doing and who's going first. But the month of April will yield, hopefully, those transparent scales.
Thank you. I do understand that the state has proposed an 11% increase, but the county has proposed that 5% increase. And so that's what we're talking about. And that's why I'm in this room instead of the state. I want more support from our local representatives. And
not to interrupt you, but I've been around long enough where the state sometimes is giving you less in years. So that the county, you know, is ebbed and flowed. When the state gives 0%, we sometimes have to give more. When the state gives more, it may be catching up for the sins of yesteryear.
Well, indeed, but they are funding all of the localities, and we are just still not keeping up with the folks next to us. People are coming to jobs, to Chesterfield for jobs, except teachers, and they are leaving is still the critical issue, and I haven't heard anything that you're working to change that. I understand you're working to keep them. I understand that the pay compression for teachers who stay is in process, and I'm very thankful for that. I know that's been a process over the past couple of years, but if we don't keep them here today, they won't be here when they have been an employee of our county for 25 years. If they're not here this summer, then they won't be here for 25 years. And I appreciate it. I know I've taken your time, and I'm very thankful for it.
Thank you.
What were you saying?
I was just going to say, I think we're on the same page. I mean, I think what you're hearing me say is that this gap that exists is not a gap that exists as to teachers. It exists as to others. So we have, from the perspective of this board, fully funded the compensation study for teachers. We have. That's not where the gap exists. Now, the gap that exists regarding recruitment is a conversation that both of us, meaning, so what traditionally happens is in our liaison meeting where there are 2 members of this board and 2 members of the school board, those are kinds of conversations we discuss, how we can collaboratively talk about how we're recruiting, how we're retaining, what other measures we can put in place, some of which involved things like benefits packages and things. But the gap that exists is not a gap related to teacher pay. We have fully funded the compensation study both last year and moving forward when it comes to what is related to teachers and that pay study. And that's been a significant mark that both boards worked very, very collaboratively with an outside consultant to put together what that looks like so that, as Dr. Casey mentioned, a teacher never gets stuck at a place where they're at year 7 or 8 and the starting salary has caught up to them. And that's what we had heard significantly. And so that does not exist in Chesterfield anymore, which quite candidly gave some of our teachers a nice bump and continues to create that bump so that they will continue to move on a scale rather than getting stuck.
Well, I agree, and certainly on the teacher pay level, again, I hear you with the pay compression and that we are working there, but part of it is also that working relationship. I think, how many people in this room are here to support more school funding? We're here to ask you, not just to pay the teachers, because we see that that's already happening. We asked for that before, and we've got it. And what we're hoping for now is the relationship where you advocate for us. You advocate, again, ahead of time and on our behalf for that healthy relationship where we come to you with a problem and say, hey, we need a recruitment. We need 700 teachers this summer. And you say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. Let me help you. And I feel like that's not the answer we're getting.
Didn't we do that with bus drivers?
And so that's what we're here asking for again. We don't think it's not possible. That's why we're here. I'm so hopeful that we can do that as well, but that's what we're asking for, to fully fund our schools, to make that relationship. We all show up and you say, oh, okay, this matters. We sign, 8,000 of us sign a petition that says, please fully fund our schools. And you go, oh, okay, that's what my constituents want. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, make sure I'm on the right question here. Considering the unmet request for funding from both the schools and other government agencies, wouldn't it be better to forego the personal property tax relief, increase vehicle registration fee, decrease the additional 1 cent decrease in property tax rate? Well, folks, that's all easy, maybe even for folks in this room to say, but I can tell you the first folks are teachers, our public safety folks, and honestly are going to say this personal property tax, this vehicle registration fee, this increase in revals on real estate makes significant differences in their pockets. And then we go from there to the fact that 30% of our families have folks in schools, and a lot of those folks too, we are hearing the cries for tax relief. These reavals have been significant. The vehicle reavals have been significant as well. And so that turning all of that money, again, it goes back also to, folks come to you and say, here's what I need. I mean, what is put together is a budget that has questions and answers attached to the budget on the school side, just like we have questions and answers attached to the budget on our side. And so we feel like the tax relief through all the different levels that we're offering gives relief to different people in different demographic levels, and hopefully gives some relief across the board to just about every family at some point in time. Next question, has someone looked at the VDOE data concerning the county allocation of funds to the CCPS budget versus other school districts versus the state contributions across all districts in Virginia? And Mr. Durkin, if you would, I don't know if that catches you off.
No, that's fine. Well, I assume that this question is referring to the split between the local and state contributions to the school. The budget team does look at this kind of metric along with other reports that are produced by the state every year. This specific report doesn't include debt service payments. So the way it's structured between different localities, some may have it on the school side, some may have it on the county, some may be a shared pot. The debt service for the schools is on the school side. So that report doesn't make it really easy to do a kind of apples to apples comparison between localities, which may explain a large amount of that discrepancy that's been referenced in the question. So the comparisons do look a little bit different using that report.
Thank you. And do I have a speaker?
Hi there.
Hi.
My name's Tracy Franson. I'm a resident in Matoaka, actually, but I have a prior commitment tomorrow, so I'm thankful that you have multiple evenings for us to view this presentation. I am here, like many of us tonight, to advocate for schools. I don't have children. I'm here as a property owner, a business owner in this county, advocating for schools because they help my business value, they help my property value, even though me personally, I don't have children in the schools. So I'm here tonight, I'm spending my time here tonight because it's that important to me. And it's not just the teachers, right? The teachers need the whole community around them. They need the support services in the schools, right? They need the instructional aides. They need the librarians. That gap that you're discussing about not wanting to fund, maybe there's a reason they're asking for it. Let's ask the teachers what help they need to make our students successful. Because our students being successful means I'm gonna have thoughtful employees as a pool to hire someday, right? I don't want robots as a pool. I want thoughtful, well-rounded, educated employees, right? And that means that all these neighborhoods that we're approving to come in, once they come in and buy these houses, where are they gonna send their kids? Jam-packed into little sardine cans, right? With teachers who are burned out, with secretaries and bus drivers who are burnt out, right? Would you want your children to take one of these jobs that are being offered for the rates being offered? Look at even at your county website, the employment opportunities at the rates being offered. Is that a job that you would be proud to somebody in your family to take for those rates? So when you're talking about you want the schools to bring their support staff down to the rates that the county pays their support staff, that's not a good argument. You should bring people up, bring pay rates up, right? Maybe I misunderstood what you were referencing there, but it sounded like you were saying the support staff at schools gets paid at a higher rate than the support staff at the county. So again, I'm just here as a member of this community. I want us all to be on the same team. It does sound very adversarial from the board saying, well, we give the schools this. Well, you give the schools all these new neighborhoods and all these new houses and all these new children. You need to fund it, right? You want to invest in property. We want you to invest in our future. That's an investment that we want to make as a community. You want to be conservative in what you want to pay teachers and support staff in schools. Well, let's be conservative in what we're going to cut from the budget, from the tax base, right? Because you can only set the budget to be conservative for the long term. We get that. But when you're cutting things, be conservative on the cutting side also. All right? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I do have to say, you know, the way in which budgeting in particular is set up in Virginia creates an adversarial tension that doesn't necessarily exist when you've got two boards that get in the room and actually are talking about the bigger scale issues of how we get things done and how we work together. And so by nature of the fact that only this board has taxing authority, it's like a parent and a child. And unfortunately, none of us like it. It's not a good relationship that was not created by us. And so unfortunately, schools look like they have to come to us because for all intents and purposes, that's the way it's set up to work. But in reality, you know, it really is a collaborative conversation that goes on. But again, you know, ultimately what does happen as a result of that is that we are the ones, meaning the Board of Supervisors are the ones that are responsible to the citizens for how, you know, that tax rate is, the tax rate, the aspect of all of these other funding sources, how we look at the big picture of economic development, how we look at the grand scheme of residential and commercial, all those things fit into the picture. And so again, sometimes the questions we ask may sound adversarial, the way in which it gets posed may sound and look adversarial, but honestly, it really comes back to the fact that these are questions and issues that the citizens, not the folks in this room, but the citizens are posing to us on a daily, consistent basis for accountability on how their tax dollars get spent. And so I think it's really important that from a citizen's perspective, you hear from us as to how we're prioritizing. And so I think it does speak that all through this pandemic, how we have combined and effectually used the resources that came to us. Most of those monies went into schools, and we were very, very much committed to making sure that our schools met the scale of being safe environments for our students. We have built new schools. We have absolutely, and have 2 middle schools that are right now have been funded and are under contract to be built to address growth issues. One actually is a replacement for Falling Creek. And so we definitely have very collaborative conversations behind the scenes, but there are sometimes the tough questions have to be asked and answered. And I think that if someone senses a frustration from me, my frustration would be when misinformation is in the public domain. And so I look at that as something that creates adversarial tension that doesn't necessarily exist. And so trying to overcome misinformation out there is difficult to do when you have 2 boards that are collaboratively working together. When we saw what was happening, and they saw what was happening with the bus driver shortage and the double backs that were happening and kids falling behind and things, we very collaboratively got together with our teams and said, how do we fix this? What does this gap look like? Where does this money exist? And so we didn't wait for a budget to happen. We didn't wait for, you know, that. It wasn't like, well, just hold on, we're in the middle of a school year, we'll look at that. So there are very, very collaborative, constant, consistent conversations that go on, and I can tell you that every one of us recognizes the incredible value that our school system brings to this county, that our teachers and other employees bring to our school system, and just like we do with our public safety folks and others. And I will say that again and again and again. But that doesn't mean that anybody has given me or any other member of our board an endless checkbook to just continue to spend money. So we all have to be mindful. And I can tell you that from our conversations with our colleagues on the school board, they are mindful of that. And they are mindful of the fact that there are, on both sides, accountabilities to be had. And it's troubling to me as a citizen who raised 2 children in this school district all the way through all of their education that anybody ever talks negatively about our district, because I can tell you we have a fabulous school district and we have fabulous teachers and we have fabulous administration and we have fabulous staff. And I have worked collaboratively through that and will continue to do that. But sometimes the tough questions come to the table and sometimes the tough issues have to be addressed, and this is the balancing of, again, the entire of 365,000 citizens. So, all right. I hope, seriously, folks can hear that there is a collaborative effort going on, but misinformation is not helpful to that effort. Is the teacher pay study scale keeping up with inflation and neighboring districts? And the answer is yes. And I will say yes a million times. I will say that we not only committed, just like we did with our public safety folks, to fund this pay study. What this means is, because we dealt with this compression issue, we committed that we would continue to fund it so that compression did not exist in 5 years again, where the starting salary approached the salary of a 5-year teacher. And so that commitment, again, means more than just 2% on top of what that teacher pay, what the actual salary number, total salary number looks like now. It's not just another 2%, it's 2% plus, which is about probably 2.5%, I think, 2 to 3/4%. We are committed to keep up with that. And so that is what makes us as well competitive with our neighboring districts, who can play with that starting salary number. But when you look at, as Dr. Casey mentioned, what that number looks like at 5 years or at career for 30 years, we are not only competitive, we're going to tell you that if you stay in Chesterfield, you're going to be rewarded for that career. If the Board of Supervisors do not believe that constituents have accurate information about the status of school funding, or that there is much of the big picture we're missing, what further communication could you engage in that would close that gap? Some of that information was information that I shared tonight as we are gathering more information about how these numbers are put together. We're asking tough questions, just like you ask tough questions in your house when you're spending money and looking at how decisions get made. And we will continue to share that out. You know, I think sometimes folks don't take advantage of some of the opportunities we have. I can tell you right now, if you're looking to follow media, it's difficult many times to get a full big picture of everything through the media, but I can tell you, and I'm going to speak on behalf of my colleague, Ms. Haynes, as well, because I've worked alongside her now for 2.5 years. She and I are available at any given point in time for a phone call, for an email, for a meeting together to discuss whatever questions exist out there, and however we can best help you answer those. Sometimes it's difficult to see where one piece fits within the big picture. Dr. Casey.
One of the things, when you talk about us trying to get together, and again, it may not be as visible, but I encourage people to pay attention, subscribe to the School County Liaison Committee. Once you're subscribed, you'll get the meeting notifications. It's a public meeting held in this room. You also see from time to time school board agenda items on the county's agenda, and sometimes presentations from the school when they're substantive. The biggest thing that's going to be happening over the next month, though, is when we finalize the budget, we will be finalizing a capital improvements program for the school that's one of the largest ever. And the bond referendum that Mr. Durkin referred to is, again, going to require a lot of knowledge to be shared between counties and schools, 10 elected officials, in essence, coming together, because, again, the school board CIP is embedded into the county CIP, embedded into the referendum question for the largest question ever asked of the people of Chesterfield County. You know, balancing a budget's not easy, you know, and again, Gerard mentioned it on one slide, and to be transparent, and we actually mentioned this last year because we never disclosed what county needs were, what a police chief's needs were, what a fire chief's needs were, because again, it was on the county side of the shop, so we kind of worked with those departments as part of the county administrator's proposed budget. So in absence of that information, it could have been viewed that everyone on the county side got, in essence, what they requested. And, you know, I think many people here, many people before, brought that to light, that if the schools have a needs that maybe sometimes is not exactly what they get, we're going to be as honest and transparent on our side for all of our departmental leaders, capital and operations, too. So that is now disclosed in detail in our budget. There's never been a budget in my 33 years of working in local government where everyone presents something and I have all the monies of an existing tax base to give, or what I should say, the tax burdens that are really afforded to what the people can digest. These are tough times for certain people. Many people probably can't afford to come out here tonight even for the tank of gas that it would take to get back and forth from some parts of the county, or the second jobs that they're working. And I appreciate everyone else coming here. All I can pledge to you is that Dr. Doherty and I, Joe Tyler, Dr. Tyler, and his counterparts on our side You know, we try to act as a team. This pay study that was referenced in the very beginning of the methodologies that we have to be a family of again, trying to have, what is our goal? To have a decompressed system between teacher, police, firefighter. We may not necessarily start at the best, but we want to start so close and sell them in a recruitment mode that if you're here for 3, 5, 7 years or whatever that mark is, and you stay here, you're going to be the highest paid and have the highest rewarding career. The teacher shortage, and again, my wife's a teacher for disclosure. She lost a lot of her friends who were in their late 50s, early 60s over the last 2 years who were just done. And so that's part of the challenge, and it's a demographic issue where in the course of 2 to 3 years, you probably lost 7 years worth of the profession that was eligible to retire and retired when they could. We have to work with our schools. We have to work with the programs of the teacher colleges or the teacher programs for certification because the pipeline is narrow. And just as mentioned, you can only raise the scales up so much. I think there was a reference the other day that there's more teacher vacancies in the state of Virginia than graduating class of teachers coming out. And that's a real issue. So what you're going to see, in essence, with some of our competitive scales, especially as you move up the ranks, we may be the ones who are getting experienced teachers to come in here because of, again, how much we're trying to have a decompressed system. And we have to pay attention to that. So we don't recruit just at the first year. We want to recruit throughout the entire scale and try and be competitive. How that all works, again, is a work in progress, but I can just pledge to you, we are going to work for progress.
And the last thing I want to mention real quickly, so when you put all this together, one of the things that we're also working through is the fact that, we are incredibly fortunate, and I say this because the staff is so strong and works so collaboratively, again, with both staffs. This county sits in a position where we, again, went through our audits with our auditing agencies, the 3 national auditing agencies, and we have AAA bond ratings. And what does that mean? That means that right now, without a bond referendum before us, at a time like this, we can take the initiative to start to take on additional debt service and build those 2 middle schools. And so we just borrowed money at less than 2% through bonds. And so that only occurs because of all of this that we're doing and making certain that our budgeting and the way in which we're looking at incomes and the way in which we're looking at every single measure of running county government comes in to allow us to stay with 3 AAA bond ratings. That has significant impact, and that impact since 2004, as was mentioned earlier by Mr. Durkin, has been in regards to debt service on schools and the additional building of new schools and additional building of additional schools as we look to trying to make sure that our students are in safe and they're in buildings that have up-to-date equipment and giving all the teachers the resources in that perspective. So again, those are incredibly collaborative conversations that we had in identifying which schools, identifying which what the priority was, and getting this thing rolled and done fast. So all of that figures in also to how the entirety of the budget is put together and weighed together. So I see Mr. Good standing up to remind us that we are right at or after 8 o'clock, correct?
Yes, ma'am. We've reached the 8 o'clock hour. We do have a couple more questions that came in just before the 8 o'clock hour. I would also suggest that any of the comments and questions we receive via Facebook, they are retained, of course, and we share those with all of our elected officials. And then just to echo what our panel mentioned earlier in terms of additional opportunities, the public hearing on March 23rd, and then you can always reach out via the Blueprint website at blueprint.chesterfield.gov or email blueprint@chesterfield.gov. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.